Indian Prime Minister Modi has met Ukrainian President Zelensky in Japan, calling the Russia-Ukraine war an issue of humanity, an issue that's also dominating this year's G7, along with burgeoning concerns over China in the Indo-Pacific. Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching World 360. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. A look at the headlines first. In a first meet since war began, Indian Prime Minister Modi holds a bilateral with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the G7 summit in Japan's Hiroshima. Prime Minister Modi stresses that the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war is a major issue impacting the entire world. Russia bans the entry to 500 Americans, including former US President Barack Obama, in response to regular sanctions imposed by the Biden administration. A Pakistani court orders the release of over 120 supporters of Imran Khan who were taken into custody in Punjab province following violent protests that erupted after the former Prime Minister's arrest on 9th May. And Syrian President Bashar al-Assad strides into the Arab League summit in Jeddah soon after Ukraine's president addressed the Gulf states, asking them to not turn a blind eye to the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has attended the G7 summit in Hiroshima and held separate bilaterals with the world leaders. Apart from the G7 leaders, the Ukrainian President also held a historic meet with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines of the summit. It is the first ever in-person meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Zelensky ever since the war in Ukraine began in February last year. And during this historic meet, Prime Minister Modi stressed that the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war was a major issue impacting the entire world. The talks in Hiroshima are focusing on the Ukraine war, the growing dominance of China, and the threat to Taiwan. Related to this are issues surrounding supply chains, even economic and energy security. Plus, the attendance of India, a country that chairs the G20 this year, is turning a spotlight on the so-called Global South or developing world. The joint communiqué stated that the leaders of the group of 7 countries are taking concrete steps to support Ukraine for as long as it takes in the face of Russia's illegal war of aggression. Now, the G7 members condemned Russia's manifestation of violation of the Charter of the United Nations and the impact of Russia's war on the rest of the world.
लेकिन पिछले साल जब हमारे बच्चे यूक्रेन से वापस आए तब उन्होंने परिस्थितियों का जो वर्णन किया उसमें मैं आपकी वेदना और यूक्रेन के नागरिकों की वेदना भली भांति समझ पाता था, उसका अंदाज लगा सकता था। और मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं कि इसके समाधान के लिए भारत और निजी रूप से मैं स्वयं हमसे जो कुछ भी हो सकता है हम अवश्य करेंगे।
Apart from that meet between the Ukrainian President and the Indian Prime Minister, the Quad Summit, which was earlier scheduled for next week in Sydney, also took place in Hiroshima on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Having said that, the meet will still happen in Sydney, but without the US President. Henceforth, this meet was equally important. Now, as the scheduled meeting had to be called off due to Biden's unavailability, the White House has released a statement thanking the other 3 Quad leaders for their flexibility. The 30-minute meeting between leaders of the United States, Japan, India and Australia focused on the developments and security of the Indo-Pacific region. In an address to the Quad leaders, Prime Minister Modi said that the group's collective focus is on, quote-unquote, fostering a free, open, prosperous and inclusive Indo-Pacific region, while President Biden has reiterated his commitment to the region as well. Let's listen.
I am very pleased to be taking part in this Quad summit today and to be among friends. The Quad group has established itself as an important platform for peace, stability, and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. There is no doubt at all about the fact that the Indo-Pacific region is the engine for global trade, innovation, and development. We agree that the security and success of the Indo-Pacific is important, not just for this region, but for the entire world. We are moving forward with a constructive agenda based on shared democratic values.
While our setting today is different, than our mission remains the same, and that is to advance our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific, and to demonstrate the capacity of democracy in the Pacific, and to demonstrate the capacity of democracies to deliver on in a shared region.
All right, let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of what these meets mean, not just for India, but for the G7 nations. And for that, let me bring in my guest from Japan today. I'm joined in by Dr. Satoru Nagao, who's a fellow, non-resident fellow at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Nagao, thank you for joining in. Now, the G7 is happening at a time when the geopolitical climate remains tense over the war in Ukraine, and concerns over China are also growing. What will be the hurdles for the Japanese Prime Minister in terms of showing a united front?
Yes, in this G7 summit, Japan focusing on the three issues, and including this how to deal with Russia's invasion against Ukraine. That's true. And three things is, I should say, the first one is Russia, another one is China, and to achieve these goals, we need the global south. That is the third one. So, but in case of the Russia's aggression to Ukraine, in our perception, Japan's perception, if Japan or international community allows Russia the invasion as beneficial for Russia, China want to follow such kind of example. So Russia's success create something, the mood, invasion is right, aggressor can get the benefit. That kind of the mood itself, Japan do not want to create. So that's why, in Japan's perception, Japan must make Russia's aggression in Ukraine fail. So Russia should be the failure aggressor in Ukraine. That is Japan's perception, and Japan is seeking.
All right, Dr.
So
Nagao.
to deter China, we need Russia's failure. That is the logic.
Thank you, Dr. Nagao, for bringing in your inputs. I'm also joined in by former senior diplomat, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh. Ambassador, thank you for joining in. Let's talk about what is in the summit for India. The Chinese envoy was in Ukraine. Zelensky also attended the summit in Saudi Arabia on Friday and has also met Prime Minister Modi in a historic meet. Of course, the aim, as we all know, is to drum up more support from neutral countries. Can India protect its own interests when the war is dominating the G7?
That's a good question. It is in India's challenge to diplomatically get back the focus of international agenda on real issues of concern to us rather than Ukraine. Ukraine is a crisis neither of our making nor of our interest. But the consequences of it are thrust upon us. So we are left to keep dealing with Ukraine much against our own wishes. Now, when you asked me about the Chinese envoy and Ukraine going to Saudi Arabia,
right.
You see, the Chinese keep appointing special envoys for trouble spots. They have a special envoy for the Horn of Africa. They have now one for Ukraine. But these special envoys are showing the Chinese flag. They are not able to do anything to really attain peace. Now, going to Saudi Arabia actually is a Saudi Arabia diplomatic coup, because they got Ukraine there, who is not exactly their friend, and where Russia has attacked. They also got Syria back, where Russia is their friend. So it is, an interesting ploy by Saudi Arabia, but it also shows that American allies are ready to talk to both Russians and the Ukrainians. And that is where India, as a country with strategic autonomy has always been ready to talk to both, and Prime Minister Modi in the past has spoken
Right.
to Presidents Putin and Zelensky, Zelensky on the phone, and Putin both personally and on the phone. So I think I wouldn't call ourselves neutral, but I think we have taken a decision in India's strategic autonomy, which we will continue to pursue.
Right. Now, also, when it comes to the India-China relationship, in an interview to Nikkei Asia, Indian Prime Minister has reiterated his stance on the India-China relationship. He says that the future development of the India-China relationship can only be based on mutual respect, sensitivity and mutual interests. While China is not even invited to the G7, how can the summit help New Delhi to counter Beijing?
G7 issued a statement today on how to deal with coercive economic diplomacy.
Right.
Basically meaning how to deal with China's coercion on economic factors, but the statement does not mention China. That is a significant part of it. So, but it talks all the kind of actions that China undertakes. But this is because the G7 itself is not united on how to deal with China, because all of them have economic relationship. Australia, Japan, and the USA had record-breaking trade with China last year. And Germany and France want to keep open economic relations with China. Canada and Australia suffer from Chinese economic bullying. So each country in the G7 has a different approach to China. So this is the least common denominator. Don't mention China, but talk about all their bullying tactics, their sanctions. But you know, this is quite rich because the G7 countries have been imposing sanctions on others, whether it is Iran or Russia, and then telling everybody else to follow. Those sanctions don't have international, legal basis. They don't come from the United Nations. So, I mean, you say China should not do this to others, but you can do it to others. So, I mean, a bit rich. But yes, as India, I think it's a good statement because we also want China to play by the rules. And that's what that G7 statement says, that if China abides by the rules, G7 will work with them because they don't want to harm China in any way.
Many thanks to you, Ambassador. I think you've explained that very eloquently. Let's now shift focus over to Pakistan, which continues to be in a state of turmoil. And an explosive revelation has come to light this week with the former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan and PTI chief levelling serious allegations against another former Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif. Khan has said that when Sharif wanted to work on getting close to India, he would ask the Pakistan army to curb terrorist activities against India. Meanwhile, a Lahore court has granted pre-arrest bail to Imran in connection with 3 cases filed against him after 9th of May post-arrest violence. Imran, his bail has been granted until 2nd of June. Beyond this, local Pakistan media says that there are 30 to 40 terrorists, as the Pakistan government has labelled them, that they are lodged at Imran Khan's Lahore residence. Now, the Lahore police personnel conducted search operations at his residence. Imran Khan even took to Twitter and called the crackdown, quote-unquote, unprecedented and called the Sharif regime a reign of terror. Let's also listen in to what the former Pak Prime Minister had to say.
जब नवाज शरीफ इंडियन लॉबी को और इजराइल लॉबी को अपने साथ बुलाना चाहता था, अपनी फौज को कह रहा था कि दहशतगर्दी में मुलविस है, उसके पैसे अरबों डॉलर बाहर पड़ा हुआ है। वो जब होता है मौके बाहर भाग जाते। तो मेरा तो कोई बाहर नहीं जाना। तो मैं इसलिए आज ये कहना चाहता हूं कि ये लोग कामयाबी से वो काम कर रहे हैं जो मेरी आंखों के सामने ईस्ट पाकिस्तान में हुआ था। लेकिन वो आदमी जो चाहता था कि मैं प्राइम मिनिस्टर बन जाऊं, उसका बहुत बड़ा हाथ था।
And with that, we talk about the latest happenings in the war in Ukraine. The Battle of Bakhmut, of course, continues. One Ukrainian unit says it has made more progress on the western outskirts of the city. Ukrainian forces have also claimed advancements in several areas surrounding the embattled eastern city in recent days, despite coming under heavy fire from Russian troops. The much talked about counter-offensive plan by Ukraine is finally taking shape, but it seems tough to understand given the confusing plan and execution. Analysts claim that Ukraine meant it that way given the volume of US and NATO hardware, advice and training that's poured into this operation. It is possible we only learn the counter-offensive has begun when its first tangible results are in fact revealed. A lot of what is happening is not even playing out in public. China's role as a peacemaker has also turned more bold, with Beijing's special envoy for the war, Li Hui, going to Ukraine and meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky, as has been suggested by reports. Zelensky also attended the Arab League summit in Saudi Arabia, calling out those Middle Eastern nations turning a blind eye to the war. Let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of where the war is standing as of now. And for that, I'm joined in by Professor Valentin Yakushik, who's the chairman of a supervisory board of Ukrainian Institute of Politics, which is a think tank. Many thanks to you, Professor, for joining in. Is the delay in declaring the start of this assault a conscious and mindful tactic on the part of Ukraine?
Well, it's very difficult to say whether what is being done is mindful or not, because there is a lot of concealing of the acts, and also the situation is changing. You see, Ukraine was almost ready to start. Ukraine doesn't say where there will be a counterattack, even though we understand that the main point of attack should be in the south in order to let Ukrainians establish control over the Azov Sea and come close to Crimea. So now there is a lot of play of words, concealing the real plans, but it's important for internal Ukrainian politics when absolute majority is expecting when there will be counteroffensive. And it's important for the Western allies because of their financial, I would say, budgetary issues. They say we give so much military help, financial help, where's the results that you can be efficient? So all the West, Ukrainian leadership and Ukrainian ordinary people, they are expecting the counter-offensive. But Russians are hitting very, very seriously. We have some problems now. Maybe it will take some more time in order to be prepared for Ukraine to start counteroffensive.
All right. Many thanks to you, Professor Yakushik. And with that, let me bring you the latest from U.S. politics. Both the sitting and former presidents Joe Biden and Donald Trump have announced their presidential bid for 2024. And there's a third contender too, all set to enter the fray. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis will formally enter the 2024 U.S. presidential election next week, becoming Donald Trump's main competitor for the Republican nomination. According to reports, DeSantis will likely file papers announcing his candidature on 25th of May to coincide with the donor gathering in Miami, with a more formal launch in the week of 29th of May. Former U.S. President Trump has in recent weeks stepped up his political attacks on the Florida governor and maintains a commanding lead in the 2024 Republican primary, that too over Ron DeSantis. Here's a report.
We say very clearly in the state of Florida, we will fight the war.
Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis is set to officially enter the 2024 U.S. presidential race next week. That's according to two sources familiar with the decision, which would make DeSantis the biggest rival of former President Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, and shake up a contest that has so far been largely one-sided. Sources say DeSantis will likely file his candidacy on May 25th, with a more formal launch the week of May 29th. Representatives for DeSantis did not immediately return a request for comment.
Florida is where woke goes to die.
Meanwhile, Trump has recently ramped up political attacks on the Florida governor and maintains a commanding lead in the 2024 Republican primary, according to a recent Reuters Ipsos poll.
We're winning big, big, big in the Republican Party for the nomination like nobody's ever seen before.
Those attacks have diminished DeSantis' standing in national polls. However, he's garnered a series of conservative victories in his state in recent months, including the scrapping of diversity programs at public universities and allowing permitless carry of concealed weapons, and most notably, banning nearly all abortions in the state of Florida.
Disastrous policies imposed.
Let's try and weigh in on the timing of DeSantis' potential announcement. And for that, I'm joined in by Crystal Knight, who's a Democrat strategist and joining me live from the United States. Crystal, thank you for joining in. At a time his popularity is diminishing, what do you make of the timing of DeSantis' expected announcement?
Well, I think what Governor Ron DeSantis is doing, he is signaling not only to the voters across the state of Florida, where he's introduced many restrictive bills and really going actually more extreme than Trump, becoming very anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-anything that is cultural in his state. And he's really trying to take that message across the United States, making sure that voters understand that he is on par with the bad rhetoric and antics of a Donald Trump, but also willing to go a step further and challenge education across this country, challenging corporations across this country. And so we expected Governor DeSantis to announce. We did not know when, but I don't think that the timing is any surprise to anyone because it was coming already.
All right. Many thanks to you, Crystal, for putting that into perspective for us. And with that, it's time to slip into a quick break, but don't go anywhere because we'll be back with the latest on that quote-unquote catastrophic car chase that, in fact, gripped Harry and Meghan.